Go ahead, give her a squeeze.
Keep pulling the trigger.
In the Metal Gear Solid series, we've seen stories unfold not just in their narrative, but in how they reflect the real-world implications of technology, biology, and the darker ambitions of those who wield them. Systems of control masters progress, and none more clear than the SOP, Sons of the Patriots.
Do you see this, Zero? We are victorious!
What matters now is the genetics technology behind that work.
You made a deal with Cypher. You offered them a new parasite in exchange for your safety.
With genetics, the clumsiness in targeting an entire race isn't an issue. We can target specific individuals.
Fox-Die only kills its victims when the infected person's genetic code fully matches the genetic sequence programmed into the virus's receptors.
I understand now. Ocelot.
Aside from Fox-Die, as widely presented in MGS4 is a perfectly developed system that has been perfected over the series, often referred to as the SOP, and later renamed Guns of the Patriots after it was hijacked by Liquid Ocelot. And of course, this was an advanced battlefield control system that operated by proxy AIs of the Patriot's control system. An SOP allowed state militaries and private military companies to monitor and enhance their performance of all soldiers deployed in combat via the nanomachines within their bodies on the cellular level. Of course, there is a few functions of this system that control nearly everything on a genetic and digital informational level, but we're looking into the third main function of the SOP, which was also to monitor and control the use of weapons on the battlefield.
To keep these things in check, they ensured that no one can use firearms or military vehicles without the proper system ID. It's true for every piece of equipment out there.
A control system operated by the proxy AIs of the Patriots designed to monitor and regulate soldiers through nanomachines inside their bodies. And what's fascinating and terrifying is SOP's third function, the control and monitoring of weapons. Every gun except a few naked models was ID locked and biometrically tied to its user. No authorization, no trigger pull. This prevented friendly fire, rogue actions, or the abuse of power, or anyone defying the Patriots' will.
Even with this SOP keeping an eye on things, there are always trouble spots to deal with in the field. Disorderly conduct, disobeying orders, contract violations. We act as backup for the system by monitoring the soldiers.
The Patriots had countless battlefields under their control, monitored and in check by AI, and puppet agents such as the Rat Patrols to ensure that things ran smoothly according to the Patriots' law. In an essence, if there was a battlefield taking place, it wouldn't go unnoticed without being on the Patriots' radar.
ID guns are equipped with locks. As long as the lock is engaged, you can't pull the trigger.
Any suggestions?
The locks are only disengaged when they recognize the nanomachine ID inside a soldier's body. Anyone not possessing nanomachines keyed to the system, or anyone who's keyed but not authorized to use that weapon, won't be able to pass the ID gun's verification process.
So I can't use PMC guns.
I'm afraid not. You're not registered with the system. And it's not just weapons either.
The groundwork for this was laid long before Guns of the Patriots. The idea of battlefield control, controlling weapons instead of deterring them, dates back to the 1970s. Within the Metal Gear timeline, Zero, anticipating the end of the Cold War and the rise of the digital age and the use of the war economy, saw unification through total surveillance and obedience. He believed the only way forward was to eliminate the unpredictability of human will by controlling every aspect of it at all cost.
The hell are these Patriots? Are they human?
Not anymore, they ain't. They're the law of this world, created over the course of history.
The idea to have an AI act for Zero came about in '74, when the data from the mammal pod penetrated NORAD. Clearly an AI couldn't be allowed to make its own decisions. So they would take away its ability to act, and instead create a specialized system in which the AI, bound by specific rules, filters the massive amounts of data it collects before passing it on to people, subtly guiding their decision-making.
That's why we must depend on information control. People need an appropriate context for their lives.
What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Even our faces will be irrelevant. The nature of communication itself will change, and it will make mankind whole again.
As a result, the evolutionary log of the human race lay open to us.
We started with genetic engineering, and in the end, we succeeded in digitizing life itself.
Bizarrely, through all of this innovation that led to the AI in the Patriots, we even see Paz hint at this philosophy in Peace Walker, that the idea of control on a mass scale is prevalent and evident as showcased in the series, including that of weapons.
Not Cypher. Cypher thought of something different. Cypher's going to control guns.
Control guns?
That is right. Not deter, control. It is the ultimate approach to the illusion of peace.
In the MGS series, we don't really often start armed. We have to procure weapons on site, echoing Kojima's pick up and survive style. But under that mechanic lies the narrative itself. The gun you pick up isn't just lying there, especially in some cases. It's encoded, ID locked, a product of the system. This was Kojima's way of weaving the lore into gameplay mechanics, but maybe we just didn't see it. SOP-like systems were already in play as early as MGS1. Naomi used Snake's nanomachines to prevent him from firing inside the nuke storage building. A clever hidden piece of tech controlled directly to the narrative, where nanomachines can be controlled and control a person's actions, or rather regulate them through a dependency. All of it's tied to the AI core system that regulates people's emotions, unless of course it's hijacked. During the Big Shell incident, SEAL Team 10 and the Grlukovich mercenaries both used ID-locked weapons. Whilst it wasn't widely presented, it was actually showcased in some of the codecs. The Arsenal Gear AIGW straight up tells Raiden he can't use enemy firearms because they're locked and they're assigned to a soldier's biometric profile. Raiden even expresses disbelief that mercs and mafia types would be using government tier ID systems.
Raiden, you won't be able to use any of the enemy's equipment.
Why not?
You should know that all active weapons are equipped with a personal identification system. The owner enters their required user ID information during the weapon registration or at the start of a mission. If anyone other than the registered user tries to fire the weapon, the ID system will not authorize the action.
But these are black market Russian weapons. How can they be equipped with identification functionality?
They must have been customized by the terrorists themselves. These are professionals we're dealing with, and they certainly won't let their own equipment be used against them.
I'm guessing it's the same for the Navy SEALs gear?
Right.
How am I supposed to procure weapons then?
Find the ones that haven't yet been individualized. Everything you find in the item box is clean. You should know this from your VR training.
But it all makes sense. In the game, you can't exactly pick up any enemy weapons and use them. Of course, it's part of the fourth wall breaking mechanic where we find our own weapons, but at the same time it makes sense when you tie it into the SOP systems. It's only really up until Metal Gear Solid 4 where you can actively pick enemy or, friendly weapons alike off the ground. Of course, not all are ID locked, as showcased when we take weapons off the rebels, but for the PMCs, for example, a lot of the weapons usually are until we unlock them via Drebin. The Big Shell mission, as we know, was a simulation, a test, a stage play by the Patriots. The chain of events that unfold in the simulation in MGS2 are clearly byproducts of every other entry in the series, especially Shadow Moses. But Ocelot, he was always 2 steps ahead. I believe it's likely that he equipped Olga's men with these ID-locked guns from the Patriots, making sure they could only fire on targets approved by the system, that they'd play their part in the simulation. That includes Raiden, which means because the Patriots wanted to test him, so the soldiers could clearly shoot Raiden, and Fat Man was a part of that test. If Raiden died there, the S3 would have ended. And there's the setting itself, an offshore cleanup facility rigged to explode, sinking into the ocean, echoing Big Boss's old base. coincidence? No, it was all planned, as I've said. Everything's a byproduct of before. It was all part of the Patriot's narrative and control. Everything's done by design in the soulless AI coding system machine that relies on past experiences and byproducts of before to craft out these simulations. It often invokes people to carry out these simulations as well as blackmail them into doing things that will satisfy the Patriot's presentation. MGS2 hints this everywhere you go when you really look at it from a deeper angle. Even the conveniently placed nodes that allow Raiden to access a radar, which basically allows you to pinpoint soldiers and where they are. These are obviously not just gameplay elements, they were surveillance tools, another layer in the illusion. Kojima wasn't just breaking the fourth wall, he was literally dragging us through it. But it was also a clue into the Patriots, also making this entire big shell a setup for a simulation. You could say that the Patriots who crafted the big shell purposely placed the nodes there for Raiden to use. It's still quite unclear how Snake disguised himself as a Navy SEAL by procuring a SEAL uniform, but it's potentially the fact that he obtained them through a government contract, or perhaps Otacon who swiped it from a base, or he most likely had knocked out a Navy SEAL and hid him taking his uniform, but that also means taking his weapon. It's more than likely that he had Otacon to procure him an M4 that he could use that wasn't ID locked, unlike the rest of the Navy SEALs. But we're not here to just talk about the Patriot simulation, even though in a way we kind of are, because all of this is about biometric guns in the context of this video and the ID systems, and how now in reality is actually a true thing. And force compliance, it all leads us back to Metal Gear Solid 4, where the dream of Zero became the nightmare of SOP, a world where weapons can be disabled at the flick of a switch, and where freedom is granted or revoked at will. And what exactly this means for our world, and the kind of control the Founding Fathers warned us about, and the reason why amendments were in place. If someone like the Patriots took control, how could the people potentially fight back if everything was biometrically controlled?
An operator.
I installed a suppressor. And here's a tranquilizer gun.
Thoughtful.
It predates the implementation of the system. By some miracle, it was never recycled.
Otacon mentions in MGS4 that by this point most weapons have been recycled. Finding a gun without ID lock tech is now trickier than ever, meaning truly practical firearms are starting to dwindle. Eventually, when Snake meets Drebin, he finds a solution to that problem. Drebins are gun launderers who strip away ID chips, making fireball arms usable again.
Now we've got us a society where everybody's DNA and personal info is totally controlled by the nanomachines inside their bodies. Won't be long before people start using havens to escape from ID control. I guess you could say my gun laundering kind of borrows from the haven concept, after a fashion.
Drebins that are the gun launderers who are essentially the black market of weapons who strip away ID chips, making firearms usable by anyone again. If history has taught us anything, is that people always find holes in the systems meant to govern them.
There you see, no problem. From now on, when you pick up an ID gun that says lock, you just let me know.
The integration of biometric tech into weapons opens a much deeper conversation, one about freedoms and control. For centuries, the right to bear arms was considered a safeguard against tyranny. As Thomas Jefferson once put it, the strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is, at a last resort, to protect themselves against tyranny in government. A fitting sentiment when reflecting on the world of MGS and the Patriots, because as the game warns us, people often allow themselves to be controlled until the system they trusted becomes the very thing that enslaves them. Even the gun, arguably the most primal tool for asserting power, or as famous author Kobo Abe would pronounce it to be, the stick, becomes a symbol of resistance when used by Big Boss and his men to fight back against oppressive regimes. But then comes that old phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, attributed to Edward Bulwer. In 1839, it's a simple idea, words and ideas that shape the world more profoundly than violence ever could. Yet under the shadow of the Patriots, that phrase becomes something deeper, more ironic. The Patriots didn't rule through violence, really. They ruled through information. They edited history, filtered truth, and programmed our reality. They didn't silence rebellion with bullets, they used it to their advantage. And anything unnecessary, they erased it with code. Their pen wasn't filled with ink, it was a censorship AI, a script editor, a machine that didn't just write the story, it decided who could exist within it and what part they would play. And in that sense, they wielded something far more dangerous than any weapon. Guns kill people, sure, but the Patriots used it to their advantage. They didn't exactly stop the problem. Metal Gear shows us this dystopia. It reflects back at you because Kojima knew something most people didn't want to admit. If the pen is mightier than the sword, then we better ask who's holding it. The pen can tell the truth, but it can also manufacture lies, false wars, phantom enemies, fake legacies. And here's the thing, the Patriots didn't fear guns, they controlled them. They just feared the ideas that came with them. That's why they didn't just disarm soldiers, they disarmed thinkers. They didn't have to break bodies when they could rewrite minds, and with the pen, they could decide exactly where the sword landed. And this is reality for those who let unchecked power get out of control.
Is that all part of your script too? Using him and the Fox unit like that. Only you could have pulled it off. But you won't be using me anymore.
Now I'll zoom back into reality. Smart guns are changing everything. Firearms aren't just regulated by law anymore. They're starting to be regulated by technology. We're entering a world where who gets to use a weapon isn't just a legal issue, it's a coded decision. Maybe not at the level as we think it is as of yet. And that forces us to ask, who gets to wield that kind of control? Many philosophers have warned that the right to bear arms isn't about taking up arms against neighbours, it's a last resort and resistance against an organised erosion of our rights. A weapon is symbolic, and like Charles Krauthammer once said, laws like the assault weapons ban are often symbolic steps, not necessarily to stop crime but to normalise control, to condition the public into accepting regulation today and confiscation tomorrow. The fears that grow in the US, especially with the rise in mass shootings, a devastating and heartbreaking reality that makes the call for bans sound rational, but it's a double-edged sword. The very weapons used to commit these atrocities are also the same ones used to prevent them, and it all comes down to who's holding them and why. Truth be told, a lot of these mass shootings really could be prevented if funding was placed in people to protect these schools and outlets with armed guards in these areas where people couldn't commit these crimes. Let's be honest, not enough measures are put in place to prevent it. Even if we add ID-controlled weapons, there's still other means and ways. But smart guns are a real-world extension of the Patriot's SOP system, and I thought it would be a great video idea to bring to the surface. They already carry identifying markers. Every legally manufactured firearm in the US as of today has a serial number etched into its frame, a kind of identity. Police often use it to trace ownership and transfers and origin, and shell casings too. They carry microscopic fingerprints left by the firing pin and chamber. In some states, ballistic fingerprints are required before a gun is even sold. So buying a firearm legally and its means is paperwork, an ID, background checks, all via the FBI's in the NICS system. An ATF form or 4473 may be a waiting period of safety course depending on the state. It's all tied back to your identity essentially. Some see that as safety, others call it just soft surveillance. It doesn't really prevent much in terms of crime. There is of course the black market, the Drebins of the real world should we say, such as straw purchases and, theft from homes, cars and gun shops as such, and something called ghost guns where people can 3D print and assemble from kits, or if they have any background knowledge from engineering they can put things together. No serial and no paper trail. It's all under the table trades. Ghost guns really are especially chilling because they are untraceable and the answer to no surveillance heavy future. No ID, no record, it's total anonymity. It's the underworld that makes the SOP concept in MGS feel all the more real and terrifying on both ends. ID-locked weapons in the game could be only fired by the assigned user, and now that's really not science fiction anymore. Companies like BioFire in Colorado have created smart guns with fingerprint and facial recognition up to 5 users. Rechargeable battery, designed to work in real-world conditions, but it's not really letting on as well as they'd hoped for. It does sound great though in theory. It reduces accidents, prevents stolen guns from being misused, and maybe even stops mass shootings before they could happen. Imagine a gun that can detect unhinged emotions and deny the shot. But in hindsight, it's going to be pretty useless up against a gun that doesn't run out of battery and can fire on command without needing any biometrics. But the uncomfortable part about this tech is who controls it. Second Amendment supporters see smart guns as a slippery slope. Today it's optional, tomorrow it's mandatory. New guns require new ammo types, and soon only ID-locked weapons may be on shelves. In places like New Jersey, laws were even passed stating that once a smart gun becomes available, only smart guns would be sold. That one law stalled the whole industry. Nobody wanted to trigger it. Nobody wanted the blowback.
3 years after the first smart gun goes on sale anywhere in the country, New Jersey firearms dealers can sell only smart guns. And that has critics up in arms.
Well, it's ludicrous. I mean, really, when you think about it, we have almost 9 million people in the state of New Jersey, and we're going to limit what they can buy based on 1 or 2 small manufacturers' design. It's a flawed bill from day one.
And what about the reliability? What happens when you need your weapon and the sensor glitches, or worse, what if someone hijacks it? In MGS4, Ocelot takes over the ID-locked firearms across Europe and other places like the American Army overnight. Entire militaries are rendered helpless. If real-world militaries adopted this tech at this scale, the risk wouldn't be malfunction, it would be complete control to those who could wield it.
The US military systems are all in Liquid's hands now. The regional systems have all been shut down. Guns are falling silent across the earth. It's the first total ceasefire in human history.
But at this stage in humanity, there's quite a lot of nationalist states that I don't think that this would become possible unless somehow we found ourselves living under a globalism regime. A complete world takeover of several nations. But all of this is really not just hypothetical, and the roots go back centuries. The Magna Carta in 1215 set the foundation for limiting sovereign power. By 1689, the English Bill of Rights gave Protestants the legal rights to bear arms for defence, the spirit of resistance that echoed in America's Second Amendment. And in 1775, British troops tried to disarm the colonies by seizing weapons in Lexington and Concord. That really wasn't a raid, was it? It was a message. You don't get to bear arms unless we say so, but we can use them. The colonists' response? They started a revolution, and naturally so. America might not be in the same place that it is today if that didn't happen. Who knows what regime it could have been under. But the right to bear arms has never just been about shooting. It's been about resisting control, and that idea is written into the DNA of Metal Gear Solid. It's why systems like SOP aren't just game mechanics, they're warnings, because the moment that we give a higher authority the power to decide who can pull the trigger, when and why, we're no longer holding the weapon is holding us. We've seen this pattern repeat through history. Authoritarian regimes such as Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, and China, each at some point implemented weapon confiscation to eliminate resistance. Because an unarmed population is easy to pacify, but an armed one, that's a different story, and that's one that is not manipulated into a false sense of reality, often at the controller's expense. Philosophically, the gun isn't evil, it's an extension of intent. It amplifies force, yes, but it doesn't generate it. The moral question lies not in the object, but in the purpose behind its use.
Point your gun at a comrade!
We will not be pawns of the KGB. We will win our own victory!
For example, a quote is stated saying, "A sword never kills anybody. It's a tool in the killer's hand," which is quoted by Lucius Anicius. Or as it's often widely implied, maybe it's not the gun, but the person who holds it, and for what intention. But as quotations go, as reimagined in the modern times by Jeff Cooper, and I quote, "The rifle itself has no moral stature, since it has no will of its own. Naturally, it may be used by evil men for evil purposes, but there are more good men than evil, and while the latter cannot be persuaded to the path of righteousness by propaganda, they can certainly be corrected by good men with rifles." End quote. It's subjective, as the quote may be serving as some truth. In most cases, in Metal Gear Solid, the gun often than none, as the protagonist we play as, is using the gun, and it's usually for a just cause. If it's not Big Boss trying to save the world from all-out destruction, or playing a part within that destruction alongside his soldiers and his right-hand man Miller, who describes that they are the embodiment of what it is to be a gun, that essentially they live by the gun.
Anyone can give up his fight by laying down arms, but the feeling of holding a gun, that we'll never forget.
But often than none, it's usually to try to save the world from itself, or Solid Snake on a solo infiltration mission trying to rescue and protect, or Raiden striking out and paving a way to protect the weak and vulnerable and exploited. Yes, MGS tells us the gun, or rather the stick, is a tool of justice.
I said my sword was a tool of justice. Not used in anger. Not used for vengeance.
But it's still destructive, and oftentimes even morally subjective lesser of evils of good people can get killed, or some manipulated into killing others for their own agendas. Sometimes the trigger that you pull is commanded by others. At the start of this video, I opened up with a quotation from Jesus Christ of Nazareth, which quotes saying, "All who draw the sword will die by the sword." And I personally think that his teaching sums it all up into one bundle, because this isn't just a spiritual proverb for those who don't believe in that side. It's a mirror held up to the face of every soldier or everyone holding a gun, every system built on violence and every ideology masked behind power. It's a clear warning that tools of war become the chains of war. Guns, once symbol of liberty or defense, evolve into instruments of subjugation when placed in the hands of those who crave control. In Metal Gear Solid, this is the very tragedy of the Sons of the Patriot system. A world that tried to end war by perfecting control only ended up breeding dependency on it, an addiction to order and a total loss of freedom. But at its core, the series never glorifies the gun. It questions it, and ultimately it offers us a different path. And I think within the teaching shows, not just within what Jesus told us and in Metal Gear, is the cycle of war and vengeance, or between two people, is the endless retaliation from one system to the next, is exactly what the boss sought to end.
Among the Mujahideen are the Pashtun people. They're fiercely devoted to their code of Badal, or revenge. Soviets they've captured have had their hands, feet, and noses cut off before being left to die at the side of the road, just to show their comrades what they're capable of. Friendlies who come across them can do nothing but put them out of their misery. Then they burn down another village in retaliation. And the cycle of vengeance goes on.
Her vision wasn't one of domination or survival, it was simply unity. A world not bound by borders, ideologies, or weapons, but by purpose, and a shared struggle towards peace, not through control, but through understanding. This quotation was used when soldiers came to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was Peter who drew his sword to defend him, striking the servant of the high priest, but Jesus stopped him. He healed the servant's wound and told Peter to put away his weapon, because those who live by the sword invite the same violence back upon themselves. It was clearly a lesson, not of surrender but of a higher purpose, that true strength is not found in domination, but in restraint.
We must meet the sword with the sword. All who take up the sword shall perish by the sword.
but within this shared wisdom between two sides, understands that the iteration of revenge will be endless and will be nothing but destruction. Therefore, the means of putting down the stick, the gun, the sword ends that cycle. Then there's no need for the gun. But I think what MGS has shown us, even though there's a time to pick up the gun,
when the time comes, I'll pull the trigger.
there is also time to put down the gun.
Time for you to put aside the gun and live.
Well, that's really all I've got to say for this one. Thank you if you've made it all this way and watched it to the very end. You are appreciated. Anyway, guys, until we meet again.
Building the future and keeping the past alive are one and the same thing.